Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, Culture Fit Assessment, the Talent Management Solution, sponsored by WorkZynga. If you are watching this webcast via live stream on any of our social channels, you will need to view the archive recording on HR.com to receive credit. If you have any questions during the webcast, please click on Q&A in your webinar controls and type them in. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Margarita Rafael for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. My name is Dr. Margarita Rafael. I am a clinical psychologist by education, and I am an IO psychologist by training. So I have my hands in both buckets and in my consultancy work. And today I am presenting from Portugal. So thank you everyone for joining me from all over the US. I don't know if we have anyone else here from anywhere else. I took a look at the demographics and the statistics a while ago, and it was interesting to see where everyone was joining in from. Today, I'm here to talk to you about culture fit assessment as a talent management solution. So let's get started. Let me just go through some of the three things that I would like for you to retain from today's webinar. I'm here to talk to you about something that I've been studying for quite a while now, and I'm not the only one studying this. But if you are here today, it's because workplace culture is something that you've been hearing, studying, interested in for a while. And what I'm here to talk to you about today is the need to finally gain a comprehensive understanding of workplace culture from the perspective of the company, sure, but also from the job seeker or the employee at those companies. So you'll find me today talking about these two sides of the same coin, which is workplace culture, okay, what does that mean? How can we make sense of it? How can we address it? How can we understand it? But how do companies understand it? How are companies talking about it? How are employees talking about it? How are job seekers talking about it? How are candidates to jobs going on interviews talking about it? They can be quite different. So today I will be talking about workplace culture, but from the perspective of companies and also from the perspective of job seekers and also employees. We can only have this conversation if we start using more words, not less, when we're talking about workplace culture. And also that the way that we talk about culture needs to be done in nuances, not in black and white. And ultimately, we can all agree in one thing, that everything that we've been hearing and studying about workplace culture has been proven that it's not enough yet. But there's solutions, there's alternative ways, and there's a way that can be objective, fair, and comprehensive for both sides. So let me just start out by showing you some statistics on why this topic is even relevant. Why am I talking to you about workplace culture? Why do we need to hire for culture? And why do you need to retain your employees for culture? Why this conversation, right? So actually WorkZynga has been running a study for the past 2 years where we interview almost 3,000 people on their intentions at work, employed and unemployed. And I am the head of psychological sciences for WorkZynga. So I've been overlooking and gathering, analyzing this data for the last this is the third year we're doing it. So this is dear data. This is quite informative and quite, it's guiding pieces of information for these conversations specifically, right? And also if you, I'm presenting these 4 statistics, if you have any further interest in reading more about it, you can always access it on our website, the 2 different culture reports that we've put together. Would you be surprised to hear that 72% of our respondents intend to stay 3 years or more when they feel that they are culturally aligned with the company? would you be surprised to hear that 93% of respondents also feel more motivated and productive when there is a sense of alignment between employee and company culture? We found that 92% reported stronger mental well-being, and in the last decade, I would say there has been plenty of important studies that have come out about mental well-being and workplace culture. So there's plenty of evidence to back up these findings. And 90% also felt more creative, more creatively free at work when they sensed an alignment between their culture and their company culture. So I show you the statistics, and I have some questions just to get you started. You don't have to share them with me. Always feel free to take some notes if you want to share them at the end of this presentation. But do you know your company culture? We'll just take a couple seconds. Do you know what workplace culture your candidates or your employees at your company prefer? And assuming that you know both, and assuming that you had a pretty good answer, that you scribbled down some pretty good answers for both of these first two questions, do you know if there's a fit between your employee or the candidates that are applying for jobs at your company and your company's workplace culture? So what if I tell you that any answer that you wrote down is a biased answer? And it's biased not because, sure, we're human beings and we respond to these questions from our own lens as anything in life, but it's biased because as of today, we are not using tools to measure and to capture people based on the understanding of culture. So any answer that you may have, any answer that you may use in defining your company culture, your own culture, is riddled of personal bias. And because of that, you are losing employees, you're missing candidates, you're missing opportunities. And eventually, for some companies, many companies, continue to be stuck in the hamster wheel that is called the Great Resignation or employee turnover or any other top term that we may want to call it. But the reality is you're missing candidates and you're losing people when you are not hiring based on culture fit. And when I'm talking about hiring based on culture fit, and I'm talking about using, identifying, utilizing objective tools to get to the nucleus of who you are, who your employees and your candidates are. So let's start with the first question. Do you know your company culture? And I am thanking you again for being here, listening to me talk about workplace culture as a talent management solution. I care about your thoughts, your questions at the end of this. And I want to get your mind going. So when you think about your company culture, what are the first words that come to mind? Feel free to take a few minutes to just scribble that down. And I'm not going to ask any more questions about your own company culture as not to guide you or in the wrong direction. We usually, and I don't know if you went through this process as you were scribbling down some words, we usually define culture by asking questions, right? Perhaps we have these, we ask these questions in our meetings, in our happy hours with our colleagues, perhaps even during interviews when we're making decisions. But when we're talking about defining the culture of a company, we ask questions such as, how are decisions made around here? What's the tolerance for risk? How much emphasis is given to stability in this company? What's the value of the individual? What's the value of the employee in the organization? How is planning handled? How is trust established? many questions. And these questions we ask ourselves, perhaps other people ask us, ask the whole team, the organization. However, what you think culture is not what your culture is, not what your culture actually is. You may have a perception of what culture, your workplace culture is, and I'm here today to help you and present a solution to guide you from this perception of what you think it is to knowledge, so you can make informed based decisions and hirings and retentions based on information. So let me just briefly talk to you about one of the models that are used to characterize culture. I'm not here to reinvent the wheel. In a way, organizational culture has been studied since, I think, the first papers that we really have on this date the late 60s, early 70s, by a number of organizational psychologists. And it really has picked up. Sure, more papers have been coming out. And there are different theories on how to define, understand what organizational culture really is. And you can use different theories to make sense of your own company and what you're really looking for. I think there is something really positive and informative about Kreuzberg and his colleagues' model. What they tried to do was to evaluate culture, understand organizational culture based on two main constructs. And these two constructs are on these axes. So how flexible or stable an organization is, and how they rely on independent or interdependent relationships. And based on these axes, they were able to identify 8 major culture descriptions. So what Kreuzberg and colleagues tried to do, and very well accomplished in my opinion and other specialists' opinion, is that there's no right or wrong culture, but there are 8 different styles, profiles, types, if you so want to call it, that combine different traits, beliefs, values into a cluster. And there are 8 different clusters that have similar traits. Now, the reason why I believe that Kreuzberg's model is so powerful and strong in defining organizational culture is because there is no right or no wrong. There's no popular or unpopular. There's no, let's all try to be more purpose-centered or more authority-focused. It's about the type, not about the judgment. And this is one of the most important decisions that you can make when you're choosing a tool to help you understand your culture, your organizational culture, and looking at new candidates or employees' culture. You don't want to find the correct, the golden standard for culture. You want to find the alignment, this fit between who you are as a company and who this other person is, who your employee is, who your candidates are, who are these job seekers talking to you, reaching out to you. You want to ensure that there is a strong level of alignment, regardless of what's perceived as right or wrong, right? So one of the types that Kreuzberg, one of the 8 that they identified, are organizations that are quite high on independence, as well and flexibility. So these would be what the so-called enjoyment-based organizations. These would be the organizations that are lighthearted, have a lighthearted environment. They're focused on self-development. They may rely on mixing personal and professional lives with a pretty good work-life balance. There is encouraged spontaneity amongst colleagues. There's a good sense of humor. And also the values that these organizations share with their employees are consistent. The enjoyment type would be the fun organizations that are driven by camaraderie, liveliness. These are some of the most important values that they would even identify and that bring these two organizations and people together. Another type identified according to this model is a learning model. So in this case, these would be organizations that are more inventive focused, open-minded. They're driven by curiosity, and perhaps in interviews, in conversations, it is this curiosity, one of the first things that is addressed. If you give them any pre-employment tool, innovation, knowledge, adventure would be at the top of the line when it comes to shared values and what they're looking for in their candidates. Tesla would be a good example of this. And then we have more. We also have more organizations that are the so-called purpose-driven, and they cross to the other side when it comes to interdependent relationships. They're also still flexible, but rely on interdependent relationships. So values such as solidarity, diversity, relationships that are based on compassion, and the activities, the promotion, the NGOs that they align with, they mirror these values. Usually purpose-driven organizations emphasize these shared ideals, contribute to a greater cause. They really put that out there. Whole Foods would be a good example of an organization that's purpose-driven per se. And then you see others that would be more, rely even more on the interdependence when it comes to relationship and not as high on flexibility. And let's call them caring. So these are organizations that what they have in common and glues them together is these warm, collaborative, welcoming places. They foster a high sense of loyalty, strong engagement, sincerity, teamwork, positive relationships. So notice the focus on the relationships here in comparison to the ones that we were talking about earlier. And then we look at the shared values: honesty, sincerity, benevolence. So these are quite different than the enjoyment type that I first started talking about, right? But nonetheless, there's not an ideal type. There's not a right or wrong type. And this is why it's so widening and open-minded about the definition of organizational culture. But look at what else these have in common. We are looking at specific objective factors and values that we can measure, that we can identify. Just go very briefly through the rest of the other types. So safety. Then we have different organizations, different companies that because of the nature of the work they do, they cannot be as flexible. They don't have any interest in being as flexible. So Lloyd's of London would be a good example. They need to rely on safety and other characteristics such as tradition, consistency. We see these in other law firms, law offices. There is a desire and need to protect, anticipate change, planning ahead, foster safety. So it's not just about the people that come in and form and create this organizational culture, right? It's also about what are these organizations doing? What's the nature of the job? What are they aiming to do in the world? What's the goal here? What are they trying to do in the world? Because the jobs that they have, the industry that they are in, that defines a lot when it comes to the organization, the organizational culture that they are adopting, right? There are companies that are more authority driven. And when I mean authority, there's no negative connotation to this, but it's a type that is more focused on the persistence, the assertiveness, the determination. There is a strong hierarchy. If we're looking at hospitals, for example, there are the military. These are organizations that need to rely on a hierarchy in order for everything to function, which is much different if we're looking at Whole Foods, for example, and the nature of the jobs there. So that's highly important to keep in mind. And then there's organizations that are more results driven when it comes to the shared values. They are driven by the vision that they have, the accomplishment, the growth, the market competition. It's important to achieve goals rather than keep a strong level of hierarchy, for example, or to define the relationships by the camaraderie, or the loyalty, and the sense of community. So result-driven organizations would be outcome-oriented, merit-based. That's some of the examples. So this is Groisberg's model. This is one of the most empirical based and scientifically validated theories when we're trying to understand and make sense of culture. And we need to understand culture based on these empirical and scientific validated theories, because we don't want to fall into the trap of our own bias when we are self-identifying and looking for people that to join our company that match our own culture. So the identification of these types, being able to put names and labels into concepts is highly relevant. But regardless of the theories that companies know or don't know anything about, how are companies discussing culture? And perhaps when you're thinking about your own job and your own company, this may cross your mind. How are companies discussing culture? Talk about mission statements. They talk about vision statements, core values. They may even sit down, write down these team's values, the whole organizational values. Eventually, they may even paint those values on a wall or write them up. It's your screensaver on your computer, your signature at the end of your emails. A code of conduct absolutely also defines a company culture. When you are discussing and gathering DEI statements, onboarding videos also tend to be ways, venues where we're discussing culture. But one thing all these elements have in common, they're all words, not necessarily actions, right? You look at job postings, you look at your statements, you look at the values. It's all word driven. And culture is not just word driven, culture is actions. So when you're understanding, evaluating your own culture, how is that revealed? The daily communication that your employees have amongst each other, with clients, the characteristics of the emails, the phone calls, the break rooms. It's decision making. At the end of the day, how are you making? How is that leadership making the decisions? How are you recruiting and candidate selecting? What are the inclusion practices that you adopt? Not just necessarily the DEI statements that you're following. What are the compensation policies and benefits? How are you paying? What are the rewards? What are the compensations? What are the policies? These say, and these define your company culture. And when you're talking about what culture is, it may not be the first thing that comes to your mind. The growth opportunities. I'm sorry. How are you promoting? How are you hiring? How are you developing your own people at your organizations? These that I mentioned, these are actions. These communication, these are practices, these are inclusions, these are actions. So it's not surprising that we're seeing our culture through a lens. We have a perception of what our culture may be. And it's through this lens of our own experience in the company, what we hear that the culture is, the values are, the observations about other people's experiences, what we read on Glassdoor, what we get as feedback, the interactions with leaders. This lens is made up of opinions about our mission, our goals we're trying to accomplish, who we are in this as part of this organization. Comparisons to our own previous experiences in different jobs, different places, different organizations, even if it's one organization and different locations. But this is perception. So what do you know about your company culture really when it comes down to it? What aspects of your company culture are you measuring so you have objective knowledge about that definition? When you discuss your culture, how much personal bias is being reflected? What knowledge, what words are you using to inform that discussion? To inform your opinions, to inform your decisions when it comes to hiring? When you can answer these questions by minimizing bias, you're expanding your candidate pool. You are improving the chances of your employees staying with your company longer. You're bringing people in because you know what your company is. And then, do you know what workplace culture your candidates prefer? People that are you bringing in? People that are reaching out to you, applying for your jobs. You know who you are, kind of. Perhaps you do. Perhaps you even have a pretty clear definition based on an objective, informed tool assessment, whatever it may be that you guys did. You know what these candidates prefer, because this is what they may say. Oh, I value work-life balance. I value independence. I value recognition and rewards. These are my expectations. This is how I like to be recognized. These are the things that you can easily say. Compensation and benefits, advancement opportunities, commute time and work from home. These are easily discussed, and these are things that you can gather from an initial phone call, 1, 2, 3 interviews. But this gives you half of the picture of what candidates really are interested in and what their culture really is. It's only half of the picture. Here's what they're not saying. Key motivators, culture preferences, latent work values that are not coming straight out of their mouth, communication style preferences, leadership, how they react and understand different leadership styles. What are their preferences? What do they respond to? This you don't get to in an interview, in a standard pre-employment assessment, in a screening, in a phone screening, in a resume. That information you don't get to. But you know what? These are the things that will help, that will influence your candidates, your employees to stay or leave your company. And this is what you need to get out of a candidate. And it's not that accessible. These are the things that are missed. And this is the other side of the figure. So needless to say, you need to see the whole picture. You need to have access to all these components, all the different elements objectively that are not accessible right away. And once you have the knowledge, once you move from the perception 2, clear knowledge. You're using the correct words, the correct terms, you're understanding the correct elements, and you can identify them in an objective way. Then you can make an informed decision and say if it is a fit, if it's an alignment with your own company. And again, talking about lens, we're seeing our candidates through lenses, reviewing the resumes, their social media, questions and answers, opinions, responses on pre-employment assessments. What is that giving you? Because the questions that I want to know and that you want to know is, what do you know about their preferences? What aspects of their candidates' preferences have you measured? Because they're not going to say. And when you discuss candidate preferences, how much personal bias is being reflected? Is your opinion going to change? Is your opinion the same as your colleague in HR? Are you going to interpret the same information today or a month from today? So the idea of moving from perception to knowledge, understanding, measuring, and using the right words to understand company culture of your own company and the culture of your employees and the job seekers is all about the need for an alignment. Is this something that fits? Is this something that adds? Is this something that's going to be a good, important, long-lasting dynamic and relationship? This is what I want to know. So how do you know if there's a fit between your company and your candidate? What do you think your culture is, or what your culture actually is at your company? There are challenges to really knowing if you're not using the appropriate tools, if you're not using the appropriate language. Some of you may be even thinking about the last time you hired someone, the conversations you had with your HR department, how you made that decision. Or perhaps you're thinking about a decision that you regretted afterwards. How much alignment is there between you and the people applying? Because again, what you know is based on bias. What you know is not necessarily based on objective information. So you, in blue as a company, in pink, you have the candidates that we just a little bit ago, we saw that we only have half of the picture most of the time. You try to understand or find an alignment. You based on reading your mission description, these employees' resume, these candidates' resume, your perception, your thoughts, and you think that this is the level of alignment in this Venn diagram, let's say. But now, if you have an objective tool that helps you and guides you to use the exact and the correct information, what you know is much bigger. You know much more about yourself that you can use, and you also know much more about the candidate that you can also use. And then look, the alignment that you saw, it was not as strong as before. And if you did not have this piece of information, you would have hired this person and this person would leave in 6 months. Because usually 6 months is just the right amount of time that people gather that information about the company, understand it's not alignment. They're not going to bother. They're going to leave. It results in high turnover rates. They're not staying. And you have to go through the process all over again based on your perception. What do you think it is? What is not working? This person has lost you money, has made you lose time, and they went elsewhere. Now, you went from perception to knowledge the moment that you went from here to greater information. And also the other way around. Perhaps you thought there would not be that much alignment and overlapping between your culture and this candidate's culture. And then the more information you gathered, you realize that, hold on a second, there's a lot of things that I missed. And I was not even going to bring this person up for an interview. I wasn't even going to explore this person anymore. And you would have just missed a good employee in your hiring process. What changed? What do you think changed? You had more knowledge about this candidate than you thought. As soon as you start using a tool that objectively measures culture on your end and on the other person's end, you moved from perception to knowledge. You have the tools. You are not making decisions based on your opinion, on your perception that's riddled with your own opinions and bias. You're making well-informed decisions by using the correct knowledge and information. And it works both ways. It works for the candidate as well. So I hope that this has been informative. My name is Dr. Margarita Rafael. I'm the head of psychological sciences. I wanted to, usually when I talk about this information, there's lots of questions, good discussions. I wanted to end a little bit earlier so we could, I could ask some questions. We could engage in some sort of a conversation. So Kathy, back to you.
Okay, Margarita. So we had a question come in.
Okay.
Someone wanted to know, what do we mean by latent work values?
Latent work values are the values that are not the ones that come out of your mouth in an interview, are not the ones that you just necessarily acknowledge or even know about yourself. These are the values that come out in you once you are in a specific setting that ask for your opinion on, do you value this or not? And perhaps you don't, or perhaps you do, and you were not even aware of that because you had not been placed in a situation that required that of you.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
To our audience, we still have some time for some extra questions. If you want to type any into the Q&A box, we have some time to take some more. Margarita, is there anything else that you wanted to review while we see if any more questions come in?
Not necessarily. You know, I understand that some of the stuff that I talked about perhaps was the first time that a lot of people were listening. Perhaps it was the first time that you're hearing about organizational culture. What is all of this about? We have companies, we have candidates. Like, what do you mean, and what are these models? So not like there's even a model to try to understand organizational culture. But here's the thing. There has been significant reports and studies done on the impacts of organizational culture in employee retention and the negative impacts on employee turnover. And as I mentioned before, WorkZinga has conducted different studies where we've gathered more than 3,000 participants, employed and non-employed, across North America, and statistics. It's statistics in that report and many other studies that drive the importance of this type of work, that drives the connection between, okay, so I have all these people leaving. Why do I suddenly have such high turnover? Why can I not hire people to stay in this job, in this company, in this position? And then you go and look at the statistics and it rings a bell. I didn't know about this. Or I was not taking this into consideration. I was not even addressing organizational culture as a factor. So it's informed-based, empirical-based decisions that more and more companies are taking. And I was just reading a statement from Cheryl And exactly, I believe talent assessments are in a selection process. Challenges which one is the best, exactly. And if you want to keep your employees, if you want to achieve this level of alignment between your company and your employees, you need to start this at the pre-employment stage.
We have
Okay,
quite a
so
few
some people
questions coming in now. Are you able to see those, or would you like me to read them out?
are they in the Q&A? Okay, I see.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You said some factors are not. So Mahida asked, you said some factors are not asked by candidates on culture, like key motivators, communication style, etc. How do you get the whole picture while doing the interview? Good question, Mahida. So there are some of this information you can gather during the interview. For example, you can have an interview guide, or you can have tools such as a culture fit assessment, where you already have this information prior to the interview, and then you have an interview guide that helps you navigate the interview based on the responses of your candidate. And culture fit assessments, again, and I directed you earlier for WorkZinga, you should take a look at what we're doing in that regard of culture fit assessments and the characteristics that are being measured. But this is one of the most important things that you can use when we're trying to objectively gather information and understand the candidates and your company. So, I'm sorry. So Charlie asked a similar question, seems like, what kind of tools would you suggest to utilize during the earlier stage of the interview process to define holistic fit? Oh, I like how you said holistic fit. Okay. I find often it's difficult to cover so many bases during a 30-minute interview. Core competencies, core values, non-negotiable, red flags, employment review. Charlie, listen, I could not agree with you more on this. And that's why you should not go into an interview without any information about this candidate. Why are you bringing this person into an interview? Do you have any information about them? So, or are you just meeting this person for the first time without any of this information? And this is this is how pre-employment assessment. I'm not talking about just like give 2, 3, even 1 hour length pre-employment assessments to your candidates before calling them in to an interview. But truth is, they are incredibly reliable. They are validated. These are measures that allow you to get this information objectively. So if you are interviewing them or your colleague is interviewing them tomorrow, you have that information. You're not relying on perception. It's objectively there. And then you can spend your 30-minute interview understanding the atmosphere, understanding other things, asking more relevant questions rather than these basic things that you can gather from other sources, such a good and validated pre-employment assessment. Cheryl asked, what makes my assessment better than others? So my assessment, and I'm going to tell you that I've spent my career studying, developing many different types of assessment. And I can tell you that this culture fit assessment that I spent years developing alongside and leading a team at WorkZinga, designing and validating, and this whole process, which took years. It's better for 2 reasons. First, it's a culture fit assessment only, meaning that we're looking at 26 different characteristics that are pertinent to culture. We're not looking at anything else that does not involve organizational culture. And the second thing is that we are looking at that alignment. We're not looking at which is the best culture or the worst culture. We're looking at the alignment between the organizational culture and your candidate or your employee culture. And how do we do this? It's a bi-directional assessment. It's 2-sided. So organizations have this information, and candidates are answering the exact same questions and also get that information. So you have both sides of this process well informed when they're coming to an interview. I hope that answered your question. Gloria asked, one of the questions you mentioned, what aspects of your culture have you measured? What ways and how do you measure culture? And how do we use the data to improve workplace culture? So let me see if I understand what question you mentioned. What aspects of culture have you measured? So I don't know if you remember, Gloria, throughout the presentation. I don't know if you said through the whole thing, but throughout the presentation, there were when there was two slides. One slide I said, this is how we think we're addressing culture, and then there's like different pop-ups, and then this is how we really measure, this is how we should be understanding culture, and then different pop-ups. Culture is leadership styles, is motivators, is values, is work traits, is communication, is many elements that you would not otherwise discuss or think of as culture. But that's what it is. These are the actions. Culture is not just the words that you have, that you use in a conversation to define your organizational culture, or the values that you write on the back of the wall. It's the actions. It's the situations that define what this culture is. So you can measure this culture, not necessarily just by a conversation, but you needed a tool that gives you an objective answer with objective vocabulary. We need to have culture literacy. We need to start calling things by what they are, not the so-so, not, oh, that thing, oh, it's a feeling. Sure, we can say that it's a feeling if we're more intuitive than others, but it's more than that. There's names, and there are tools, and there are assessments that you can rely on. And how do you use the data to improve workplace culture? My response to that is that you use the data to move from perception to knowledge, to inform who you are as an organization and where are your employees standing. Is your organization, people who are making decisions, C-level here, and then your employees are there? What's going on? What's the gap? What's the overlap? Use this data by asking questions. You have to ask these questions. And if you have a validated tool to ask these questions, then it's science speaking for itself. Those are really good questions. I could continue. I can continue talking about it. Charlie, are other professional finding that candidates are receptive to these pre-employment assessments? We often try to make the candidate experience as smooth as possible, so the challenge is to ensure the process is easy for the job seeker too, while gathering as much information as possible. Yes, so I hear your struggle, and here from my experience, and also based on literature, your candidates are not engaged in pre-employment assessments when they don't get anything out of it, right? When they spend hours and energy answering a number of questions and then they get nothing back. Perhaps they don't even get a call back or an interview or nothing about themselves. So when I did, and my team developed this culture fit assessment, one of the main intentions was to democratize the pre-employment assessment and the hiring tools in general. And by democratizing the process, I mean giving the candidate something, give them knowledge. They need to know who they are and where that alignment is as well. It's not just fair or even useful for the company to have this information. It's in the company's benefit that the candidate also knows who the company is. Be transparent, because these are the people that are going to stay. They're going to accept that job offer. And as a company, you either choose to give that information about your own culture and allow your candidate to know that about themselves and the level of alignment, or to wait it out 6 months when that other person perhaps is going to leave. So they're going to find out who you are as a company. It depends on you. It's up to you at what stage you want to let them know. But it's really impressive how we have seen that the moment that candidates know they're going to get a report and information from an assessment, first they respond immediately. They don't let that email in their inbox lay around for a long time. They do it right away and quickly, which is always in the company's benefit as well, to speed up that process. That was such a good question. Okay, Kathy. Okay, thanks, Charlie. If you feel free. I don't know if this is possible, Kathy. If you want to, I think it is possible. If you want to continue the discussion, if you have more questions that come up afterwards, if you want to reach out to explore, discuss, talk, listen, I think it's pretty visible that I'm quite passionate about this topic. I've dedicated years of my life to studying and developing something that companies can finally utilize. And WorkZynga is where you would find a lot of this information. And if you want to reach out directly to me, I can redirect you to the best sources when it comes to these pre-employment assessments and the need to move from perception to knowledge when we're talking about company culture. Thank you, everyone. Yes, I can. Thank you for remembering, for reminding me. Okay, there you go.
Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Margarita Rafael for this presentation today, and thank you to all our attendees for joining us. If you joined late and would like to view the webcast again, the recording and slides will be available on HR.com on our archived webcast page. Please take a few moments and fill out the webcast survey that will open on your screen. Your feedback is very important to us. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest